So we're discussing the current situation in our missions class on the types of missions that are out there. We have looked at denominational missions. What is the distinctive about denominational missions?
They work with their own group, their own denomination. Usually have one mission for the whole work.
All right.
The missionaries don't necessarily need the people of the churches, and they're supported by funding that goes directly from the church to the head organization.
All right. I don't know if that came out on the tape, but yes, you have missions that are organized by, superintended by, governed by, policies laid down by the denominational leadership. And missionaries apply to that particular leadership, and they would be sent out by a sort of like a super church, something that is over the local church's level, and very little relationship between the local churches and the missionary. And furthermore, the type of work that the missionary does is focused to meet the goals and desires of the denomination itself. So you'd have people establishing denominational churches. One of the better known examples in our country of denominational missions is the Southern Baptist Convention. My mother was saying that recently she's discovered that the Southern Baptists are seeking to work in Canada now. And they have a very unique way of doing it. They'll come into a community. One of the missionaries will just come into a community. They'll build a real nice church, and they've got a budget that has no relationship to necessarily to the way people live in that particular community. Like if they were to move into Searchmont, for example, right? For an independent missionary to go up to Searchmont and live and be supported, probably wouldn't have a very great budget to work with. The Southern Baptist could go in there, and he's probably got $40,000 a year to work with, build a real nice place, and he doesn't have to worry about money. He can spend lots of money on programs and entertainment and all this kind of stuff, and they have a tendency, she said, the Southern Baptists, for example, have a tendency to destroy by the competition because of the money that they have at their disposal. And this happens. That's
Maybe some other time we should ask a little more information about them. I don't know.
Well, that is a negative example, but she has actually seen that happen in little communities. It leads to a very institutionalized orientation in missions, and in church life as well. People, the church is segmented from reality. It's too bad. That is not to say that there is not a lot of work being done by denominational missions, and good work as well. Right? Then, secondly, we looked at independent missions. And what is the distinctive primarily between independent and denominational missions? Not a single source, usually.
Denominational would take our denomination.
Right.
They're usually local church run, so they're not necessarily denominational churches.
Right. That's the key point, that independent churches arose historically as a reaction to or a disagreement with, right, or as a variable option to denominational type missions, where people just, historically Hudson Taylor was one of these guys that broke the ground in this area. That in those days, You had Baptist missions, and you had Anglican missions, and you had some of these coming out of Scotland and England. The Reformed churches had their own missions, right? Back in the 1800s, and when Hudson Taylor, for example, thought of bringing into existence a mission working in China, for one thing, they didn't have the communications that we have today, right? And it would be very difficult to maintain the autocratic control coming down from the denominational headquarters, right? Looking after and supervising the missionaries under their control. And so when he established the China Inland Mission, it was he was drawing people from anywhere, and he was not underwritten by or supported by any particular major denomination. And so independent missions was a new idea back in the 1800s. Right. That is not to say that independent missions would not necessarily work with denominational missions. Yeah. Yeah.
They're not necessarily. So you gotta look at the fact of what they're teaching.
Independent missions then have developed down through the years to include various various types of, what is the word I'm looking for? Variation isn't the word, but there's a variety of different ways that these groups have developed, right? Some have distinctives. They're all independent, but they have unique distinctives by which you could subcategorize them. For example, faith missions. What is distinctive about the faith missions? And they're usually independent missions. What is distinctive about a faith mission? Sorry?
So each church demand or basically try to get to the out they go and things what situation where they're going.
Okay, they'll inform people. They won't necessarily solicit funds, and they certainly aren't underwritten by a guaranteed salary like some of the denominational missionaries are. Okay. Stan Williams alluded to this in his some of his talks this week, where he applied. Well, he didn't apply to, but he went out to just find out about Northern Canada Evangelical Mission. Well, that's a faith mission. It's not underwritten by a particular denomination, and it reaches out and draws its support from all different kinds of groups, right? But these people required required a support level. Like how many people have promised to support you. Well, this is not a guaranteed support, but it's a promised support. Understand the difference, right? And they generally require of their missionary a required promise level of support. And he said, no. And so they allowed him to go out on that. Right? They allowed him. So it shows a certain amount of flexibility in faith missions. This has to do with the financial policy, right? In some cases, they will allow people to go of pure faith. In some cases, sometimes purely by faith. Although they promised to monitor his situation.
Our group that one we're associated with, the missionaries who go to the world mission community, a lot of those people, they're not, I do not believe that they're giving recommendations they have
The brethren are like that, brethren assemblies. Now, you'll find, and I saw a list of Ken's place one day, he showed me, that they had a list of brethren missionaries, like the missionaries from assemblies that are working in various parts of the world, and a lot of brethren missionaries are working with missions, which is kind of, that's an increasing phenomenon among the assemblies, where originally, I guess, they were more independent, strictly independent. So the assemblies, would be considered, assembly missionaries would be considered independent missionaries. Now, this is actually one of the things that we need to talk about when you talk about types of missions. Some are independent missions, that is, they have independent mission boards. Assemblies historically don't agree with that. They believe in the local assembly being the local churches being the sending agencies, sort of, right? Now they have adapted to having what they call a missionary service committee. In Canada or in the States, it's called Christian Missions in Many Lands, CMML. Some of you need to pay attention here because this is kind of a unique situation in modern missions. NCEM, NEF, GMU, BIMI, Baptist World Missions, BWM, Gospel Mission of South America. If you were to list missions, most of the ones that I've listed there are all independent. But they all have one thing in common, and that is they have boards that control the missionary, basically, independently from the local churches, which provide the funds and the personnel. Okay? Whereas the assemblies are independent as well. They work independently. That is, they don't work as a denomination, nor do they have one single board that governs and controls and lays policy and superintends, right, and disciplines, if necessary, the missionaries. Rather, this sort of an independent relationship is that the local churches sit in judgment upon. They send, they recognize, they commend is the word that the assemblies use. They commend missionaries directly from local churches, sometimes one church, sometimes a few churches. Like I can give you names of people that are commended to the work in Northern Ontario. They're supported by several local churches along the North Shore. All right?
My sister's father-in-law and mother-in-law, they go to the assembly go across the country. I find their card names on the board.
Right. As time goes on, the cost of supporting missionaries is increasing, in almost every country in the world, and so, it takes more people to support more missionaries, the same number of missionaries. Right? But, this is still a faith principle. These people go out, they don't have the money in their pocket necessarily. Ken Wilson, for example, who works with the Shantymen the Shantymen Christian Association is a faith mission. Okay? That is that now Ken is from Brethren Assembly. This is kind of interesting, right? He was commended to the work by the assembly, but he joined the Shantymen. The Shantymen supervise his work. They They evaluate his work. They lay policies and guidelines down for the way he operates. He has to write reports to the Shantyman head office in Toronto. He meets with other Shantyman missionaries for encouragement and guidance and cooperation, laying down, out at Camp Kilbrae, they have their yearly missionary conference, right? But, most of Ken's support probably comes from that one church down in Simcoe. One assembly. Right? There's an example of a faith mission. So you have independent mission boards, have certain characteristics. The assemblies would probably be considered, the MSC and the CMML in the States of the assemblies in Canada and America would probably be classified under independent, but they work differently. That is, these people are merely clearinghouse agencies, to my knowledge. And by the way, talking about these two agencies, the MSC and the CMML, the other day, Don McNaughton was through, and he's the field representative for Central Canada, for the Shantymen. But he was telling me, I don't know if you heard that at the table, but he was telling me that the MSC in Canada, Missionary Service Committee for the Assemblies, got special treatment from the Department of National Revenue. Special treatment, because they are a special case. They're unlike any other mission board, if you wish, that's operating in this country. And they waived certain conditions and allowed them to have special status in Canada in terms of tax receipts and, relating to Revenue Canada. It's kind of
because they don't control mission.
Right. Like I think what he's talking about is that when money is given, for example, to a church, the church cannot write on a receipt, this money is designated to such and such a person. That's against the law. Charities aren't allowed to do that. You cannot designate money through a charity for an individual. Right? The money can be channeled to an individual, but the way you word it legally, you can get into trouble. Right? Well, that's all the MSC does. They basically take monies that come from various assemblies. I could send money to Ken Wilson, for example, through MSC. Right? We've gotten money here at Northland Bible College that was sent to us from assemblies in this province, right? Cleared through MSC. These people can offer income tax, what's the word I'm looking for? Tax exempt receipts. You get exemption in your taxes, deductions for charitable donations, because they are recognized and they have a charitable registration number. But basically all they do is they channel funds to individuals. And apparently they got a special treatment. Right? So they are, if you will, a mission board, but a different kind of an independent mission board, even than the other types like Shantymen and these ones that we talked about. Cook in his book describes some independent missions as almost denominational in character. An example would be Baptist International Missions Incorporated, the one that Dan Seymour is working on. Right? It's Baptist, right? But it's an independent. It's not underwritten by the Conservative Baptist or the General Association of Regular Baptists, GARB in the States, or IFMA, or any particular denomination. It draws from all kinds of independent churches and maybe some denominational churches, but they only establish Baptist churches. And so it's kind of like a hybrid between an independent type of mission board and a denominational. You see the crossovers that you've got here, all the varieties? Last class we were working on interdenominational missions. Interdenominational, what's the difference between an independent and an interdenominational?
Denominational, a number of, any one number can do more denominations for us to get.
How is that different from independent? Or is it any different?
Well, independent, most cases not under denominational mission.
Right. And generally speaking, independent mission boards are probably supported by a more limited constituency. Right. For example, I'm not sure I can give you an example of an independent. Well, we use ourselves for an example, right? Northland Bible College is supported by, I think I told you this, some Baptist churches, some Bible churches, some assemblies, some gospel halls. Very restricted. And we don't encourage people. You know, like we don't go very often to Pentecostal churches to encourage people to come to the college and to support the ministry. This is the difference between, and this would be a more characteristic of an independent type mission work as opposed to an interdenominational, which would draw from anyone as long as they're evangelical. And most of these mission boards, you will find, they will work with people from right across the board. And it tends to be sort of a melting pot approach, much more compromise required in an interdenominational mission. That's right. So, for example, I think there are missionaries working with Shantymen that have come from Mennonite Brethren, from Baptist, from the assemblies. They would probably come from the Fellowship Baptist, and then from the all-mill side. I forget the name. You have pre-mill Baptist groups, then you've got all-mill Baptist groups. Well, there's no distinction we made in the Shantymen. They draw support from all mills and pre-mills, right? So you've got, and then you have different kinds of assemblies, and I don't know for sure, but they would probably accept a person from the Alliance, the Missionary Church, stuff like that. Right? This is what you call an interdenominational mission board. Okay? Interdenominational. That is, as long as you preach the gospel, you could work with them. They would actually. Well, they probably all have their threshold. I shouldn't say that. There are some missions that have no threshold, but some of these would. Yeah, right. Because they have found by experience that it's very divisive and it doesn't work on the mission field.
You guys can't teach.
Sure. In a description of an interdenominational mission, Cook uses the example of Overseas Missionary Fellowship, which is the modern descendant of China Inland Mission founded by Hudson Taylor. And he gave a description of 5 principles, financial principles that govern policies laid down by that particular interdenominational mission. They don't ask people to support them, nor do they solicit for missionaries. They don't go around asking people to join OMF. Right? Nor do they allow anybody to go into debt. Nor do they guarantee anyone a salary. They will accept candidates for Overseas Missionary Fellowship from any evangelical denomination. Any evangelical denomination. Now, I think historically the term evangelical means Protestant. Protestant and non-cultic. Right? In other words, the Mormons preach the gospel too, but it's a different and most evangelicals recognize the difference between it. Evangelical is non-Catholic, right, historically. Well, that just about includes everybody. United Church, Christian Missionary Alliance, Methodist, Presbyterian, Anglican. They'll accept just about anybody.
There's some churches like that.
That's right. There are very liberal Lutheran churches today, very liberal Methodist churches.
United.
Wesleyan, United Church today has gone apostate. But then I get material from a fellow in Ottawa, his name is Bruce Pringle, and he's a United Church man, and he's straight as a die. Yeah.
Anglican, in most cases, can't get the big books and stuff that people make.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, there is a visual.
Ken Wilson was a guy who was an Anglican up north, he's real on-fire evangelical sort of guy, witnesses. So you have to take these people as they come. But the problem is that if you were going to work with an interdenominational mission, you'd want to be pretty well informed as, if you thought that you were going to go to, say, Germany and work with somebody with a particular interdenominational mission. You might pay you very well to double check and see what kind of people they accept and who are working on that particular field, because you work with those people. And you would probably find a very liberal cross-section of workers on a field like that. In fact, Werner and Carol, they went out with Gospel Missionary Union, GMU, 2 years back. They went to Austria. Well, over in Germany and France, in Europe, right at the present time, there are, 2 or 3 Bible schools. That's all there are, outside of the denominational ones. Right? And these people don't believe in creationism. They're all male. Don't believe in eternal security. Charismatic. Those are the evangelical seminaries. That's the kind of stuff they're putting out. They don't believe in the first 11 chapters of Genesis are literal. Right? And so these are the kind of people that you would have to work with, and you would probably find real difficulty in working with. So this is a description of interdenominational that has developed into a very compromise-oriented type of approach to missions today. You are finding that the people in interdenominational missions today, I'm going to have to give you some specific examples. I don't have them today. They are beginning to pool their resources. They're beginning to actually work with Catholics. Interdenominational missions now are beginning to work with Catholics. The next thing I want to talk about, I'm not going to do it today. I want to quit. But I don't have enough stuff in my library. I'm going to have to start borrowing some books, I guess, or buying some. But I didn't have a book in my library that talked about parachurch organizations, and that's part of missions today. There are a lot of missionary groups working out there that fall under a whole new heading. They're businesses. And they're not governed at all by the local church. They have no influence by or governing structure by the local church.
Kind of like bookstores.
Well, how about TV? TV ministries, radio ministries, like Radio Bible Class would be a parachurch organization.
How about resort in France?
That's right. Entrepreneurs in France would be somewhat like a parachurch organization. HCJB, a radio ministry in South America. Question? You have a question?